Joining us now is writer Peter Fox. He's contributor to Tablet Magazine and The Forward. Peter, we thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, glad to be here.
One of the young men in that video, Mark Siegel, the young man at the time of the Stonewall Riots, you write about him in your latest article for Tablet Magazine and how that night, 50 years ago, shaped his life. But talk about the influence that he and how that night have had on others.
Well, that night, Mark Siegel was only 18 years old.
Right.
He had just left home telling his parents he was going to New York for college from Philly. And in reality, he wasn't going to school. He was actually going to explore his sexuality because he learned from the David Susskind program years earlier that gay people could live a robust, secret society life in the Greenwich Village. When he went to Stonewall that night, he had no idea that it was going to lead to 50 years of a new civil rights movement. Prior to that moment, there were other riots of sorts. Stonewall actually wasn't the first gay rebellion, but it was the first time that it catalyzed a gay and LGBT civil rights movement.
Had it not been for the Stonewall Inn and the riots, do you think that the LGBT rights movement in the U.S. would have galvanized the way it has?
It would have taken much longer. It probably would have been more in the 80s, late 80s, like when the AIDS crisis hit. But I do think eventually it would have happened, but we probably wouldn't be where we are today. Probably not with marriage equality and the House just passing the Equality Act, moving to the Senate.
Just a couple weeks ago, you had New York Police Commissioner James O'Neill, who 50 years later apologized on behalf of the police department for what happened and for the Stonewall raid. Half a century later, it took 50 years for that apology to come. What was your reaction when you heard that?
I think it's a good thing. I know there's a lot of political pressure for that to happen with the alignment of the World Pride Parade happening this year, 50 years after the Stonewall anniversary. So I understand the reality, and I think it's good that he finally made an apology. Yeah.
Gay rights movement has made enormous strides. We've been talking about that. But what are the biggest challenges that you see right now and going forward?
Right now, the biggest issues are facing the transgender community. Specifically, under the Trump administration, there's been several rollbacks on trans equality. So the transgender military ban, the reversal of Obama-era policies that allowed transgender people to have access to homeless shelters for youth, for the ACA to allow for transgender-inclusive healthcare policies. We need to make sure that that stays inclusive.
Stonewall's 50th in tandem with the first World Pride celebration in America. Listen, it's going to be taking New York City by storm over the course of the next few days. When people tune in and they see all of the news coverage and they hear about the story again and the 50th of the Stonewall riots, what is it that you would want and you would hope that they take away from it?
I hope that people appreciate the transformation in society's perception of gay and LGBTQ people as a whole, that it's not just the changes in law that's so profound. It's really when people are visible, it changes everything. And so I think people should appreciate the people that came before us that made this history possible, people like Mark Siegel, but also people who lost their lives in the AIDS crisis or who never even had a chance to have a visible life before the 1960s. So for many centuries, this wasn't possible. And we should remember that it's only been about 5 years where there's been widespread public support in this country.
All right, Peter Fox, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks.
Great to see you.
Great.
Thanks for coming on.